welcome to Leadership Team Talk. I'm delighted to have Natalie Turner with me today. Welcome, Natalie.
Thank you. Lovely to be here, James. Thank you for inviting me.
My absolute pleasure to have you on. And if you don't know Natalie, she is an award-winning author of Yes, You Can Innovate. She's the inventor of the 6 Eyes of Innovation. She's done loads of keynote speaking, including TEDx, and the founder of Women Who Lead. So quite a list of credentials. So I'm actually delighted to have you on. We're talking about the human side of innovation today, and I'm delighted because Natalie's going to share some top tips really about how you and your team can be more innovative. Before we dive into that, briefly, Natalie, what's your story? How have you got to where you are now?
Wow, how long have we got, James? In a nutshell, quick potted history. I was working in the corporate world for a number of years as an innovation director and design thinking facilitator, responsible really for working with organizations to help them develop customer-centered, human-centered products and services. And then I realized actually that a lot of the issues around getting those ideas, those very, a lot of the time very fantastic ideas out into the world, was less about the idea and more about the people. So when you talk about the human side of innovation, that's really what I'm passionate about. And so I moved and set up my own business back in 2006 and have been working, developing and growing a business around the model I invented, the 6 Eyes, as you mentioned, to help more human-centered innovation in the world, really.
Fantastic! Yeah, I love the fact that you said human there, because we are on the cusp of some major changes.
Yeah.
I'll be asking you about that later on, and what your views are. Let's also try and bust some myths. Yeah. So when we say kind of innovation, I tell you what. Before we go there, what is innovation?
Yes. That's always the question to start with, I think. And even that, thinking about people working in teams, leading teams, managing teams, or contributing to teams, I think even having that discussion is really good to get everybody to think about what it might mean for them. So I define innovation, of course, there are many, many definitions of it, is creating something valuable out of an idea that's new to you. And so within that, we have the creation of value, that it's not just creativity, it's something of impact, something has come out of that idea, if you like. And that could be many different types of things. It could be a product or a service, but what we're seeing more and more these days is processes and services and policies, different things. It's not just tangible stuff, like maybe what we saw it in the past. And that the ideas are new, that there is some form of novelty, maybe not always new to the world, but at least new to the person or the team or the organization. Otherwise, it's just business as usual. So that's how I define it.
Yeah, I love the fact that you said, well, what does it mean to them? Because it can mean different things. You might need to be highly innovative as a business and come up with the next new thing. Or on another level, you might need to just slot 3 things together that are really valuable to your customers. And whilst that isn't the pinnacle of innovation, it could transform your business or your service to your customers.
And I think you're right there. I think we have to think about scope and scale, because there's obviously radical innovation and things which are coming in and massively disrupting our world, like, what we're experiencing now with artificial intelligence, suddenly sort of growing in momentum. And then there's things that are more smaller, more incremental, not necessarily step change, radical stuff, but they're still innovative things that are improving our ways of working or thinking or collaborating and doing stuff. And getting people to think that way, I think, is also quite important. So you can sort of think, well, what am I working on here? Is it something that's just for my day-to-day job and I'm trying to do things differently? Or am I really looking and working on something that's going to really change the way that we work as an organization?
What would you say the most common kind of myths or barriers are that you've come across?
It's interesting, years working in this field, but I still think one of the biggest myths is that to be innovative is to be creative and that it equates with creativity. And of course, creativity is fundamental to innovation because that is where we use our
Yeah,
imagination. It's where we come up with new things, new ideas, new ways of thinking. But at the end of the day, you can do that all day long and not be innovative, And if you don't create something with those ideas, with your imagination, then you've just been creative. You haven't actually solved a problem, or you haven't addressed an opportunity, or created something that has had some type of impact
yeah,
in what you're doing. So I still see that as the biggest barrier. And as I go around talking to people, working with people, and I ask them, okay, well, what does it mean? But most people still say, oh, it's when we come up with creative ideas, and innovating is so much more than that. So yeah, I would say that's one of the biggest myths.
and it's even the words people use, because
Yeah.
often everyone will have a sort of meaning that's different from a word, and
Mm,
creativity is one of those words, isn't it? I mean, a
yeah.
lot a lot of people associate it with kind of art subjects at school,
Hmm. Hmm.
for example, and have defined maybe at an early age that they're not creative
Yeah.
because of that limited definition. Whereas we know today that actually creativity is a far broader way of solving
Mm.
skills, etc., etc. What would you say to that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think there are different ways of being creative. And it's interesting that whole piece about childhood, because we do also know that our creativity does decline with age. And, there have been longitudinal studies done, that natural curiosity, maybe that natural sort of inquisitiveness that we have as children, and we are playing more, and we're sort of exploring and discovering, and we have less judgment maybe in our thinking. And then by the time we've gone through our upbringing, our education, and university and into the workplace, we've seen from longitudinal studies that the ability to think laterally anyway and
Yeah,
creatively has declined massively, and that then causes a bit of an invisible disability in a way. But I do think that to be creative, there are different ways of expressing that, and
invisible. Sorry to interrupt. Invisible disability.
mm.
What exactly do you mean by that?
Well, you can't really see it, but you can
Yeah,
experience it. I think that's the thing. We hire people into our teams, into our organisations, maybe thinking that they're going to be bringing in new ways of thinking. And of course, sometimes they do, but there is also, because of this, I suppose we have to be able to sort of stimulate the creative mind again. And interesting when we talk about artificial intelligence, because actually that can really help us. I think, the creative aspect, idea generation,
yeah.
lateral thought, problem solving. Wow. I mean, if you haven't used any of the artificial intelligence softwares out there yet, then you're missing something, because it can come up with some great ideas, actually. So it's not just all about, thinking things through. It can be quite generative too. So I think, when I say invisible, it's just not seen so much until you're in the experience, and until you're, with people, and then you realize, okay, we maybe need to stimulate an environment to get creative thought flowing again, and for people to feel free to contribute their ideas as well.
Nice.
And when we're looking at teams too, and team leaders, cultivating that in their environment is very, very key, because you can also hire creative people in, and then they're stifled because the environment doesn't really give them a means to be able to flourish and bring their skills and gifts.
We'll come back to AI later on in this conversation. You talked about our creativity declining. So what 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 can leaders do to, I don't know, I call it, ignite that kind of inner 5-year-old. We all,
Mm.
we've all come across that 5-year-old child that is just, why this, why that. They're just insatiable with curiosity, aren't they?
Yes.
It's actually an amazing thing. It can be quite annoying, but it's
Hmm.
actually an amazing, beautiful thing. How do people ignite that in their team?
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. So there's a brilliant book I recommend if people haven't read it. It's called The Artist's Way by
Right?
Julia Cameron. And she talks a lot about this, that people, it's not just written for artists, but it is written for people who might feel a little bit blocked because they can't actually get through, bringing some new ideas out. And that's got lots of great tips and tools in it on how to do that, how to do it for yourself. But I think, in a team setting, a lot of it these days is creating an environment where people don't feel judgment. Either
Yeah.
judgment in the self, but also judgment from other people. I mean, I do a lot of training and facilitation of groups, and to even just spend some time before they start to try and generate ideas to really talk about this and talk about self-censorship, self-judgment, self-criticism. I think it's so strong in most of our minds to be judgmental, to even sort of surface that and say, okay, let's all realize we have that of ourselves, and actually we even stop ourselves from speaking up a lot of the
Yeah. No,
time because
I
we're
know what you mean. Yeah.
criticizing. Yeah. So how do we become aware of that in the self, but then also in a team environment, how we're doing it with each other, and to say to people, okay, in this phase of the journey of ideas, we need freedom. We need freedom to express ourselves, even if we're not going to do this. We have to realize that this is the stage of the journey where we have to let go and really have that freedom. It's interesting because I've written a novel and I'm just starting my second one, and and going from an editing mindset back into a first draft mindset it's that same thing, because the
Okay.
editing mindset is always about self, but you're criticizing your work. You have to, you've got to structure it, order it, got to think it through, rewrite. And then the first draft requires the free mind, the non-judgmental mind, the
Yeah.
playful mind. And so you have to then put your head literally in that space again. And that is difficult. And so it's a challenge, I think, for people, whether they are artistic or not, but in the workplace too, because we are experiencing judgment, and we're hired really to be judgmental, aren't we? We're hired to get things done, to organize, to implement, to drive things out into the world.
Yeah. So yeah, going into an ideation session, a
Mm.
brainstorm, whatever people call them, it's actually quite an unnatural environment, isn't it?
Yeah, it
So
is. I think it is.
you almost need the the ground.
Mm.
Lost my words there, but you almost need to lay the foundations first, don't you? So
Yeah,
to give
absolutely.
people that, I don't know, psychological safety. That's the you know the big word, and I think the number one thing that unlocks the
Mm.
potential of teams. But you don't get that by just going at the beginning of a session saying, "Oh, you can say what you like; it'll be
Yeah.
all right." Perhaps you need more first. What do you
Yes.
think?
I think, even if you look at sort of the whole of the idea and the concept of brainstorming, which we all know, we've all heard, people don't realize that there are rules to brainstorming, and one of them is drop judgment.
Yeah,
And so to actually to lay the land and create that environment for people first by saying, okay, free will, go wild, anything goes, go for quantity, go for as many ideas as you can, and and just and do that, and then drop judgment and build on each other's
yeah,
ideas. I think if you sort of set sort of, I often call them shared agreements or rules of the road, if you
yeah,
like, get that out in the open and discuss that first and say, okay, we're all on that playing field. Now let us go for it. Let's just see what we can create, what we can come up with. I think that's very important for creating an environment where people feel a bit more free. And also letting people, I express their own ideas before they build, because there's a lot of quieter people, particularly in group settings, that don't contribute because they are more reflective and they need to have a bit of time to think. And then you have all the extroverts just
Yeah,
jumping
yeah.
over everything.
Let's touch on this. You see this on The Apprentice all the time, don't you?
Yeah.
You see the confident idiot um out there, and they just say, "Oh, I know this, I lead it," and you know, go forward an hour, and they're explaining why it all failed. Because there's an
Yes.
expert in their team that had loads of good ideas, and nobody listened to them. How do you how do you counter that?
Mm. Well, one of the things, just from a facilitation perspective, I think what I found very useful during COVID actually was, training people using collaborative whiteboards, things like Mural or Miro, those
Right?
sorts
Yeah,
of boards where you get people, because everyone's coming in from different areas, and that everyone can contribute. It's like they've got a shared space where they can put ideas, write ideas up, and it's a bit different to when you're in a group together. But just from a facilitation perspective, I would say I always say to people, just spend some time first thinking on your own ideas that you have that actually would address this problem or challenge that we've got, or a new opportunity that we might be looking at, and then let's share. Then
yeah,
let's build. So it gives people a bit of time to reflect, and so you hear diverse voices. You hear different contributions, and not just the loud people or the more dominant people in the room or in the group. And particularly working a lot in Asia, which I have done for many years now, that works very well, because a lot of people are far more reflective, and they do want more time to think about ideas themselves, and then build and then share. And I think it just gives a space for more reflective or more introverted people to then contribute their ideas.
yeah. Really good point. And often there's a kind of, I don't know, homework to get,
Hmm.
even if it's not
Yeah.
stuff to be marked at the session, but it's just to get their brain thinking ahead, because some people need that time.
Yeah.
What about fun? Because actually,
Hmm.
we need to tap into that fun, because when people are enjoying themselves, they're
Yeah.
generally a little bit less inhibited, aren't they? But
Yes.
how
Yeah.
have you got any tips to really ignite and tap into the fun if you're facilitating a session?
Well, I think first of all, it's understanding why fun is important, and I think what happens is when we're at ease and when we laugh, is we often are taking in more oxygen into the body, which is
Yeah,
hitting the brain, which is opening up the brain and relaxing the nervous system. And so, that's why I think, one physiological reason why people do find it a bit easier if they are feeling in a state of relaxation. And we've heard all these stories that ideas come to people when they're not even thinking about stuff, or when they're sort of, in a state of walking along the road or in the shower or whatever, and they have ideas. But I think fun is a very important thing. It just takes me back to years ago when I was working as an innovation director in design thinking. We would often create these very creative workshops where people would be dressing up, acting as the customer. We would do all these different types of scenarios, role plays, fun, just fun activities to get a lot of people doing things that they probably wouldn't normally do. That got their brain again out of their just fixed way of thinking, to saying, okay, well, if we think from this perspective, or if we think outside of the box, literally, then okay, we can come up with new ideas. So having that environment which creates that sort of more playful, and also just a more of a relaxing environment, I think can help to stimulate ideas. And people who like a drink, a glass of wine, we also know that, don't we? Sitting
great.
in
Yeah,
a bar or the pub, and loads of ideas will often come up. So it's about the relaxation.
yeah. Get rid of those inhibitors. And it's
Yeah.
interesting. It's interesting what you said there. Is like you can come up with ideas at unusual places, like in the shower,
Mm.
on a walk, or anything. So, and we've talked there about facilitating a session.
Mm.
Is it an ongoing process, innovation, or can you fix it in a session? What's your kind of views, given that we have ideas all at different moments in time?
Yeah. Well, I think, that's just one, that, getting the idea is just the beginning, isn't it? And actually, even before getting the idea, what's useful is for us to even know, well, what, why are we getting ideas, and what do we need ideas for? Are there particular problems or challenges? Have we identified even what they are? Are we clear on what, what space we're looking at? Is it something that we're trying to, solve for a customer, for example? Or is it, trying to, so but even before you try to come up with a solution, if you like, we need to have that open space of discovery, or I call it identifying
Yeah, that's the
opportunities.
first of your
Yeah.
eyes, isn't it? And
Yeah, because otherwise you can end up with loads of ideas, and then where do they go? Because you haven't even thought about, well, what are the ideas for? And people can have great fun coming up with ideas, and then they all disperse. It's like all the energy of that idea generation just goes out the door, because it's not really addressing an identified opportunity, or of direction. And I think that's where the leader and the manager can be very instrumental in creating the sort of the strategic direction for ignition, and for creative thought, and for the energy that goes behind that in the
yeah, because
first
you want to
place.
focus your energy on the right question, the right
Yeah.
problem to solve or opportunity to unleash, don't you?
Yeah, absolutely. And then of course you've got to do a lot more after that. And you can spend a lot of time and energy identifying and igniting ideas, and even investigating them. But unless you're really going to get some traction on it, pick ideas, back them, resource them, take them forward into implementation, then you haven't really innovated. You just had a very nice creative time of exploration, and that's okay. But it's not okay if what you have to do is produce and create impact with something that you've done. And I've worked in many teams that have been like that in my life, and you sort of reflect back on it now, and you think, well, yeah, we did have a really good time. We created some amazing things, but a lot of them just got lost. They didn't get moved forward, or they got stalled in some way, because they weren't really managed properly. There was no innovation management around the flow of the ideas themselves.
Do you need to set the parameters up as well early on?
I think it can help. I mean, obviously, innovating is not a sort of linear journey. It's not a step one, step two, step three process. So there are elements where things will always come left of field, and they will, and you have to be responsive and agile to things that are changing in your environment. At the same time, I think if we can have that mindset of bringing innovative ways of thinking and working as a way of working, rather than just something that happens in an ad hoc way, or with some particular department that have been given the task of innovation,
Yeah.
and then all the rest of everyone's just getting on with their job. I think we've got to sort of get away from that sort of divide, because I think it can actually be quite unhealthy, and to help everybody understand they have contribution to make. And if there is direction about, okay, what are the things we need to solve, what are the challenges, what are the new opportunities that are rising, and let's like break those down, and then direct the energy of people towards that frame. I think that can help a lot more. And we know, even like with some sort of idea or innovation management campaigns, they can be very, very good, because they can actually say, this is the challenge and we're facing, everyone. What ideas have you got? And then to crowdsource ideas, from all different types of people, and end users or customers, to actually help to solve those ideas, it is far better than just having random ideas that aren't actually going to be directed to anything in particular.
As you were speaking, then I was thinking, well, it's so critical, but maybe it's forgotten to then
Mm,
agree on the problem first. Yeah,
yeah.
get everyone's buy-in to that. Is that right?
Yes, I talk, with the work that I do and that we do in our organization is we talk a lot about purpose-centered innovation. And it can sound quite highfalutin, oh, the purpose of life or whatever. But, at the team level and at the level of engaging people, if you just think of getting alignment as purpose in a sense, what is it we're trying to do for whom?
Yeah.
And not necessarily solutions at this point, but you're just trying to understand, you know, why are we doing this? What's behind it, and are we all in agreement that this is really where we need to be focusing? And then going up into identify, okay, so where are the opportunities for that purpose, to start to explore it and unpack it. I think if we do that more, then we get all the energy of the different types of people in our teams in an alignment, but still with diversity. And that's really, really powerful. And
Mm.
people, even that alone can really open up light bulbs for people. And, in their head, they're like, oh, wow, I didn't even realize you saw it this way and this person saw it this way. And we're actually all in completely going in different directions.
Absolutely. I'm always banging on about assumptions, even in the tiniest thing, because you could have quite a good, well-written innovation brief, for example.
Mm,
But unless you go to the right lengths of saying, well, actually, why we're doing it, and good is going to look like this. Then, do you
mm,
agree? Um, then there's a chance it doesn't. You've made some assumptions,
absolutely.
and the more I don't
Yeah.
know, it's a bit like using the five whys, isn't it? Well, why are we doing that? Why are we
Hmm.
doing that?
Yeah.
Sure,
Yeah.
you
That's a great tool. Yeah.
it's a really simple tool, but it just makes sure that your problem is defined at the highest level.
Yeah. And it can act as an anchor as well. I often say purpose is like an anchor, and it's also something we can come back to through the journey of innovation. And you say, okay, we've got all these ideas. Let's go back to purpose. Are the ideas actually going to address the purpose of what we're trying to do, or are they not? Or are the ideas changing the purpose in some way? And are we conscious of that? Let's discuss it. Let's get it out. Let's think about that. And so it's right at the center, if you like. And if you think of yourself standing on purpose,
Yeah,
literally, and then looking out. So where is the idea? Where is it traveling? What does it need? Who does it need? What skills, what mindsets does it need to move forward and to become something, not just an idea? That's very, very powerful, even from a sort of kinesthetic point of view, to sort of look at it that way.
absolutely. And where do you how do you move on? Because I guess we've talked about the kind of the open ended, anything goes area. I guess something with that. Your divergent thinking,
Mm,
if you like. And at some point, you then start converging, don't you, to get that down to stuff. How do you? When is the right time? How do you
mm,
approach the change in kind of types of thinking that's required for the whole
yeah.
journey?
Well, I think the pace will depend on what the project is or what you're working on. I mean, if you're working on something that's going to be, having to invest in it and it's going to cost a lot of money and time and everything else, then you're probably going to be wanting to spend far more time, just defining what you're doing and getting different ideas and solutions, um, as to something that might be very quick in your day job that you're working on. And you're thinking, right, okay, I've got a few ideas and I just need to get on with it now and just choose something and move forward. And so I like the sort of concept of dialing up and dialing down, and sort of thinking about innovation as a journey that can be very fast. And it can be quite a long journey, depending on what you're actually working on and how complex it is with regards to what you're working on. But at some point, whatever, you are going to have to converge and say, right, and that's where leadership can be very good too, to say, okay, where are we? And it's interesting you say that, because I think what can often happen with the more igniter type of leaders, the
Yeah,
idea generating leaders, is they stay too long in ignite because they like it there, they're comfortable there, and they're good at getting ideas themselves. And they need to stand out from themselves and hover above and say, okay, have we got enough ideas now? Do we need to be really investigating, or do we need to be improving? And how do we do that? How do we move forward? I mean, some of the things that I think that can help there is to have some sort of selection criteria, as into how do you evaluate your ideas in the first place.
Absolutely, yeah.
So running them through a grid, whether it's something quite formal or just something in your own mind if you're only working on your own.
Okay. And what do you? What's the best practice? Do you need to sort of lead people through this? Say if I was running a session myself, do you need to lead people through this so they say, well, this is your moment where you say absolutely anything and build on ideas and without judgment, etc. And now we're going to do that. Now we're going to actually take these and we're going to grade them, or this
Yeah.
is the process.
I think, one of the things that I found very powerful in team working is to, because what happens in teams is that we get focused on what we're doing, not how we're doing it. And I think it's quite important to sort of get people to have a pause, if you like. I call it the purpose pause. Let's step
Nice.
out. Let's step out of the activity now, and let's reflect on how we're working and where are we in the journey. What do we need to be doing now? What mindset are we in? What mindset should we be in? Who have we got doing stuff? And obviously with more complexity, if you're managing something that's got different departments and different types of stakeholders and everything involved, then you've got to do that across that to sort of see, well, where are people coming in at different stages. If it's just you and your team and you're working together
Yeah.
to achieve something, then the complexity is less. And so it's, in a sense, it's easier for you to have those sorts of facilitations and discussions with your immediate team and say, okay, well, we've been working on this. Where should we be? Where are we on the plan? Where are we on the journey? Because it's not always like, okay, identify, ignite, investigate, invest. It's you pop around, don't you? When you're innovating, you're moving backwards and forwards, you're
Absolutely.
iterating all the time. That's why it is hard work, and why it's harder to manage in many ways, because it's not just a straightforward line of development. So yes, I think that can help to surface how people are thinking, how they're working.
You asked the question yourself there, in terms of, you asked, oh, what mindset do I need in your response? So
Yeah.
can I throw that back at you, Natalie? So, well, what mindset might you recommend to leaders who are driving this change?
Well, I think, I talk about multiple mindsets, not one mindset. It's interesting because people often say, oh, we need a mindset of innovation, as if it's just one thing to be innovative. Well, actually, we know just from this conversation, you've got lots of different things going on and lots of different ways of thinking. So I talk about 6 mindsets. You need that curiosity. We were talking
Yeah,
about the open-mindedness. You need the creative mindset. You need a critical mindset, which is very different to a creative mindset, because you're going to have to say no. You're going to have to sort of sharpen your tools and sort of cut through things, and be more judgmental too. You're going to have judgment. You can't do everything. So that's hard. That shift from openness and creative, curious thinking to a judgmental, more critical mind, hopefully a good judgment, not just a negative type of
yeah,
judgment.
objective,
But
yeah,
you've got to have that, haven't you?
yes,
Otherwise, how are you ever going to converge to drive something through and improve it? So yeah, to have those. But then you also need courage. Because if you don't have courage, then you're never going to get anything off the ground. You're never going to drive anything through. So particularly for leaders, they need to have a courageous mindset and a committed mindset,
yeah,
because you've got to stick at it. You've got to have resilience, persistence, particularly when you're trying to do new things. Otherwise, it's not going to happen. You're going to give up too easily. And then you need
absolutely,
to have that clever mindset. So I have like these sort of 6 C's, if you like, of the different mindsets that we need to be aware of in ourselves. But if we're managing other people, then we need to be aware of it over the collective. Because otherwise, people can be like staying far too long in one type of mindset, and you're like, right, okay, well, we need to be shifting gear here now. Let's move more into in a critical mind, because we need to start to evaluate.
yeah. That's really interesting because there's so much to do there. You've got to think of it yourself.
Mm.
You've got to think about at what
Yeah.
point do I need to turn on the particular mindset? How are my team? What do I need to draw them out? And I guess
Hmm.
depending on your strengths as an individual, and potentially we haven't really talked about your biases as an individual, because we
Mm.
all have loads of those that we're not even aware of, me included. Um, then at some point you'd turn to someone external, wouldn't you, to help the facilitation, not necessarily through lack
Mm.
of skill. When would you encourage a leader to say, well, yeah, take part in it, serve your team, do something different rather than trying to run it? When would you recommend that?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, I think probably for both of us, we've done a lot of that type of work for organizations.
Yeah,
And I think to be the objective outsider, isn't it? You haven't got any axe to grind. And you are bringing in the facilitation of the journey. And I think that's very, very powerful. And for the leader to be part of the journey rather than the one facilitating it is often can help them, because they are then in the journey rather than trying to lead the journey
yeah,
as the facilitator, because you want their thinking as a facilitator. You have to be objective. You have to be outside of it. Of course, you're bringing in your skills and your own mindset to it, but you're helping people to think things through for themselves. And it's great if the leader is part of that journey. So I would always encourage, as much as people can, if they're going on some type of new discovery and they want their team to innovate together more effectively, is to bring in an outsider to help them through that, to coach them through that journey and that process. And not just from the facilitation of getting the ideas or forming them, but also helping them hold accountability. Because I think
yeah,
what can happen a lot of the times is that you can have these great away days and everyone's got generates great
yeah,
stuff. Then they go back to work and it was like, oh well, what happened with all that? Everything's back to business as usual, and everything's dissipate, and all the enthusiasm and energy that was in those encounters has gone. But if you've got an external coach that's driving you forward and saying, right, well, what's happening? How are you doing this? And again, reflecting on behavior, not just on activity, then that can help to really surface and drive and create more impact from the ideas that were generated.
yeah. It's a learning experience as well. Yeah, I
Yeah.
often say, because one of the things that I think it really enables is it enables people to park their status and ego at the door.
Mm, yes.
Because
Yes.
if you are just all humans, because we're talking about the human side of it, if you're just all
Hmm.
equal humans, then I think that helps us to reduce the judgment and the
Yeah.
thing. And if I don't know, if other things might facilitate that. Just dress casually, you may be standing up. There's lots of little things you can do to just make it kind of a normal. Without going down the pub, it can be more like
Mm.
going down the pub kind of thing.
Yeah, and I think hierarchy is quite interesting there. I mean, sometimes hierarchy can hold back other people in the team from contributing because of the power distance relationship between the leadership and the team members, if you like. And then that has to be looked at. And sometimes it could be, well, the leader isn't involved at all, or they're coming in as a sort of a checkpoint type person rather than being involved in all the thinking. That's often happened too. And I've had to, I've had that type of experience, because sometimes people won't contribute. They won't speak up. They won't share their thinking if they have people more senior than them in the room. And less so maybe
Yeah,
in the Western world, but definitely in certain Asian cultures, that would be more dominant from my experience. So you have to sort of think around those things too. Who are we working with, and what's the needs of the group, and how does the group function? What are the sort of cultural norms that have to be taken into consideration?
that's quite interesting. It reminds me of my kind of marketing days, and one of the things that I always remember was if you had an agency pitch, that kind of stuff, they would
Mm,
always start with the most junior person in the room and say, "What do you think?" And
right.
and the leader
Okay.
would reserve their opinion to
Mm,
the end, but for the obvious reasons that if the leader said, "Well, I love it, thought it was fantastic,"
yeah.
you're more likely to just nod along, aren't you?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And if there is deference a lot of the time, then it's like, well, what does the leader want us to do? Rather than, how do we contribute to the thinking around that? So, yeah, there's a lot of power politics at play within these types of things that has to be thought about. And it can be sometimes that leaders are saying, oh, well, I want my people to think differently. And you think, well, actually, you're part of the problem. The reason they're not thinking differently is because you're leading them in a particular way. And they might not even be that aware of it too. So there's a lot of these sort of nuances of people that have to be thought about, I think, when we're trying to get people to innovate together and to collaborate.
Yeah. Well, to those people, I often ask, well, what success looks like, because you very much set the parameter, don't you?
Mm-hmm.
You set the tone as a leader. So if you said, look, success looks like us all having a laugh, loads of
Yeah.
people sharing stupid ideas, then you've set a tone that enables that.
Yeah. Yeah. And then if it also, I mean, there have been times when I've gone through a facilitation and you had those sorts of great ideas and that fun. And then it's like, okay, where are we now? And you sort of, having a chat with the leader on the side and they're saying, right, well, we need to drive things through now. We need to sort of, get more serious and get an output from this. And of course, that's important because you are there to have an impact. You're there to create something that's going to address an issue.
I mentioned briefly there's sort of unconscious biases. I mean, there's lists of about 40 of them. I couldn't reel them all off my head. But what ones are really pertinent that you think people should be really aware of?
Well, I do think some of these things we've already been talking about, like the nuances around power, the aspects around diversity. We talk a lot about diversity and inclusion and everything, and I think we all have a lot of biases around people that are not like us, people that are similar to us. We hire people that are like us rather than really wanting, to say, oh yeah, let's have diversity and let's collaborate, but that actually is very hard work. To have diverse people with very different views and to collaborate effectively requires us to step out of ourselves and obviously, to innovate and to bring in some really fresh thinking. That can be great, but it does require us to let go of our a lot of the biases that we might hold.
Yeah, hard work, but a better result. If everyone's like you just all naturally agree and get to a consensus really quickly, but you haven't gone.
Yeah.
You haven't really gone out there to get something that could be the nugget that you were needing.
Yeah, absolutely.
We're a bit biased to our first idea as well, aren't we? How do you combat that?
It's interesting. I think going back to the facilitation of creative thinking, if you like, I always say to people, write down all the ideas that you've got in your head right now, and then park them. So you acknowledge what people's ideas are, and they're all captured, and that gives people a sense of security and safety that their ideas aren't going to get lost. But then
nice.
You say, right, now let's just open the mind. Now we've got everything out. Let's open it up to some fresh thinking, and then bringing in some forms of stimulus or creative thinking tools or lateral thinking tools to help people to diverge away from their current mindset, to get them out of their current view and perspective. Then you can start to see other things start, trickling in, and it may well be that they'll drop those original ideas, or they'll laterally combine them in some way. But that helps.
That's really nice. Part of doing this podcast, I learn an awful lot myself. That's a lovely little idea that I will share with those I work with as well. It's really, really good. Thank you for sharing that.
Oh, you're welcome.
Now, we alluded earlier that we'd come back to AI. Some people are really scared. Some people are really excited. Some people don't know what to think yet. Huge question.
That is a huge question. Well, it's interesting, isn't it? Because you think we're back to what was it, November, when ChatGPT, OpenAI, sort of hit the world in a bigger way, and then you think where we are now. So how many months has gone by? Nearly a year. Nearly a year has gone by. And you look at the adoption rates and the usage rates now of artificial intelligence and how fast it is evolving, and how we have to be on the cusp and on the edge all the time, because I think what's very interesting with it is, going back to what I was saying about scope and scale earlier, sort of disruptive technologies were always seen as something that were out there on the periphery, and impacting, in a way, in the future. But
Yeah,
now you've got artificial intelligence, which is not on the periphery at all. It's very much in the day-to-day, normal day work. It's not like, oh, the special people that are doing special projects somewhere
yes,
in the
yeah, yeah,
dungeons of the organization are experimenting with stuff. It's suddenly you've got to you've got to get your workforce sort of more up to speed on these things, for lots of different reasons. I mean, there's huge productivity gains to be had, using artificial intelligence. It's like, in a sense, having another team member, and I think some of the
that's
skills
interesting. Yeah,
of innovation are going to be more about, well, how do you manage both human and artificial intelligence, and
absolutely.
how do you
Yeah,
sort of, even yourself, your editorial skills are going to have to rise, because you're not going to just take stuff, I hope, and just sort of say, oh yeah, that's great, and just push it out there. You've got to do a lot more of the critical thinking. Actually, you've got to do a lot more of the editing, the critical thinking, and the implementation of stuff that the AI may well create for you or with you,
yeah,
in a collaborative way. So there might be a sort of a shift from well, there will be a shift, and there is a
definitely.
shift,
Yeah,
in terms of the types of skill sets that we need around the innovation journey, incorporating both the artificial and the human together. To be able to have better outcomes, better outputs. I think, there's a massive dark side. We all know that too. And who knows? It was interesting.
there's
I
a
was talking
dark
with a
side to
lady
everything,
yesterday.
isn't there? Any tool has different uses.
Yeah.
Take I don't know,
The
kitchen knife.
ethics.
Give it to chef,
Yeah.
you'll have something amazing. Give it to somebody in the
Yeah.
wrong hands, and it can kill people. But
We do. So we do need to be thinking how we're generating all this, and how we're sort of, as far as we can, because it is like a runaway train, really. I mean, how you sort of regulate and, create structures and environments for the development of this I think is a massive area. And I was just chatting with someone yesterday who's a specialist in this field of ethics and AI. And in itself, that's
that's huge.
exploding as
That's
an
huge.
area.
Yeah,
Yeah. So yes, there's lots on this. That's a big subject in and of itself. But I just think, from a top level viewpoint of just using more artificial intelligence in the innovation journey, it's amazing how good it is to generate, and also to test, to investigate ideas, to help you think things through, to even help with your planning. I mean, you really, you're missing a trick if you're not using it more, I think,
so
in
what's
in
one
your helping your thinking
what a
place.
couple of things you do with it, Natalie?
Well, I particularly for things like this, like for
Yeah,
podcasts and stuff, it's brilliant, because you can just upload it, get your transcript, get your summaries, get your key messages out of it. What would have might have taken you like a few days' work in the old world is done in, a matter of, I wouldn't even say hours. I mean,
yeah,
obviously, after that, you as the human have to decide, well, how are you going to, do you agree with some of the things that it said, or other things? You've got to apply your own critical mind to it, and then you need to put things together and implement everything. But just in terms of, the output that it can create, from a marketing perspective, and from, a sort of, a summarizing and, perspective, it is pretty amazing. I've done all sorts of things, from very high level strategic thinking. To me, it's like having a consultant. I'm like,
yeah. And I
okay, I'm
think
going, yeah,
that's
yeah.
I've been talking to a number of people on this, as I'm sure you have, and I think the fact that you mentioned it, or think of it as a team member,
Mm.
somebody else described it to me the other day as, think of it as another species. They're not quite like us. They don't quite have the same nuances or emotions, but it is another member of the team. And
Yeah.
as soon as I adopted that mentality, then you start communicating it in a different way, don't you?
Yeah, yeah, and I think, there are so many ways that we're going to, to learn. I mean, just in this one year, I think back to not having it and now having it. It's a bit like pre-internet or pre-mobile, and then suddenly you've got that. You can't quite imagine life without it anymore. And no doubt it's going to get even more amazing over coming months, years.
Absolutely, we are using the worst version of AI ever
Yes,
just now, and
yes.
it's going to change. Well, thank you for your perspective on that. I know you've already shared it. You've already shared a book recommendation with us. So,
Oh yeah, the
it
artist's way. Yeah.
the artist. Well, I'm going to ask you a different question. You've been successful in building your own um, business. A lot of small business owners listen to this. What I don't know, what mistake or thing from hindsight could you share that they can learn from?
Wow. Yeah, there are. Well, it's an interesting one, isn't it? Because sometimes when you do look back, you think, "Oh, would I have chosen to have done this had I known? This would have been the outcome." So I wouldn't say so much mistake. I would say be open to what is emerging right in front of you, and how you can get quite sort of, it's got to be this way and this is how you see it. And I think having that sort of, and I think about the identify stage of innovation, I often think of it as like a fence with like holes in the fence.
Right,
You've got to have your direction and your strategy. Without that, you don't know where you're going at all. So you need that, but you need the holes in the fence. You need to be able to climb out the fence sometimes and go off into another direction because something else has changed in your environment. A new opportunity has suddenly emerged, and you have to be able to evaluate it. So I think it's about being sort of very responsive to your environment and within the bigger purpose of what you're trying to create, and always remembering that the fence is there for a reason. But you also need the holes in the fence to be able to respond to change. So, for example, an example from my own walk as a small business owner, I started a business in 2006 in
yeah,
London, grew it into an agency, Shoreditch, fancy place, in London, lovely. Employed people, lots of people on payroll, lots of money having to be generated every month. And then obviously the financial crisis hit. So we had to lay people off. We had to regroup, rethink. And it was around that time I got invited to Singapore to speak at an innovation conference. And so I flew there. And then I realized actually so much was happening in Asia around innovation and creative thinking that there was an opportunity. I still actually
fantastic.
had the same vision, but
Yeah,
it made me then say, right, let's go to the other side of the world and build again and do new things and do it differently. And I think it's, and now I live in Portugal. So I was 13 years in Asia, and now I'm in Portugal, and new things are emerging here. But I would tell you, my vision and my not so much the strategy, but the vision and the purpose is exactly the same. And it's
yeah,
always been about how do I help empower people and organizations to have a human-centered approach to innovating built on purpose. And that has never changed. It's never shifted. It's just how I've done it, where I've done it, what I've done has shifted within that. But the absolute clarity of where you want to go and what you're about, I think holds you through the hard times, because you will have them. You will have hard times, and success is not
yes,
a
yeah.
straight line that goes up into the clouds. It's all over the place. It's up and down, round and round, round the roundabout. And so know that too. You don't come to a place of like, oh, I am there on the pinnacle, or you might be, but then you might be down the mountain the following month. So
Absolutely.
having that agility and responsiveness and courage is fundamental to a small business owner.
Thank you so much for sharing. Thank you so much for joining us as well. Real pleasure to have you on. I know we've alluded to these six eyes. I believe there is a free masterclass that people can watch
Mhm.
to get up to speed on that as well. If they don't know what we've been talking about, we can include details of that, below the video. Uh, Thank you very much, Natalie.
Thank
Pleasure.
you. It's been a pleasure. I've really enjoyed this conversation.
Thank you so much, and thank you for sharing so openly as well. You're truly
You're
kind of
welcome.
walking the talk on the
Yeah.
point of purpose there of that vision. Thank you.
Great. Thank you.